webinar, so you've only just seen me. So I should probably introduce myself. I'm Monica Bennett. I'm the Director of Thought Leadership at the Global Infrastructure Hub, and I will be moderating the panel discussions today. So before we get into those panel discussions, let me set the scene by giving a quick 3-minute overview on some of the key findings of our research into InfraTech. And then straight after that, we will get into our 2 panel sessions. So as Henry mentioned, and as Sir Danny mentioned as well, technological innovation is critical to meeting our long-term goals, especially during these exceptional times. So in this context, we're hoping that you will all be able to take away, 3 key things from this webinar. The first is, obviously that InfraTech plays a critical role in supporting the climate transition. The second is that InfraTech can help bridge the financing gap. And the third is that, while this is going to be challenging, and we're not downplaying, how the challenges associated with this, it can be done. Next slide, please. So when we talk about InfraTech and its ability to support the climate transition, we undertook a recent analysis that showed that 53% of global greenhouse gas emissions is related to infrastructure. When we broke this down across the infrastructure value chain, I'm sure it's unsurprising to many of you that a large proportion of these infrastructure emissions are actually related to the operation of infrastructure, and that includes, primarily the operation of buildings and transport infrastructure. But what's probably less well known is this remaining 19% of greenhouse gas emissions. So, this can actually be derived from construction and the use of materials in infrastructure. And we would normally refer to this as the embodied emissions from infrastructure. Next slide, please. So when we map some of this data to potential solutions to decarbonize infrastructure, for example, move to renewables and a move to electric vehicles, for example, can potentially address up to 64% of infrastructure's emissions. A move to alternative fuels, so for example, hydrogen, can potentially address up to 28% of emissions. And circular economy planning, design, and construction can address some of that 19% of embodied emissions that everybody seems to forget about. So the solutions to quite a substantial 53% of the world's emissions are essentially underpinned by technology. So so I guess we can say that InfraTech is definitely critical to achieving the climate transition. Next slide, please. And on the second point, when we talk about infrastructure as being able to help bridge the financing gap, this can be done by attracting more investment to infrastructure or by introducing efficiencies that help reduce some of the cost. When we did an analysis through our infrastructure outlook, we've seen that around $94 trillion worth of investment is needed by 2040 globally to be able to meet our infrastructure needs. Based on predictions of what this spending could potentially look like over the next couple of decades, we estimate that the investment gap is at around $15 trillion. Now, if we apply a modest 10% of efficiency through the scalable deployment of technology, we get a benefit of around 9.4 trillion. So what this means is that InfraTech could potentially bridge 60% of the investment gap if technology was deployed at scale. Next slide, please. And so for anyone who has been involved in technology projects, both great and small, I know what you're all thinking, that being able to deploy technology at scale, at a global scale, and being able to meet some of these incredibly challenging problems such as climate change and bridging the investment gap, it seems incredibly idealistic and probably a nearly impossible task. So, I don't want to downplay some of those challenges ahead with respect to technology. So yes, it is going to be difficult, but as our presenters today can demonstrate, it can be done. And given the evidence in support of InfraTech, I think it probably has to be done. So where we're really going to focus our discussions today is on solutions to de-risking the technology, especially during the early adoption phase. And we can call that the valley of death. we can expect that investments into technology can probably be within the range of about $50 to $100 million per project, which is a serious level of investment. And as you can see in the diagram, because of the risks involved and the magnitude of investment, there is a chasm in terms of the availability of financing. So some of the de-risking solutions we'll be talking about today are listed here, but I'm not going to go into them, obviously, because they are going to be covered through our panel sessions. Next slide, please.